Harriet Tubman, Prologue, Black Moses. Long before the Civil War began, Harriet Tubman started her own war against slavery. Born a slave, she worked day after day and year after year in Maryland farms. The daughter of one master whipped her, scaring her for her life. Another master fractured her skull. She saw her sisters taken away by slave traders. She was not allowed to learn to read and write. As the years passed, she began planning ways to escape from slavery. She knew that many other slaves managed to flee. She also knew that many had been tracked down, beaten, and brought back in chains. But she decided that freedom was worth whatever she had to do to find it. On a fall day in 1849, all the slaves heard her singing, "When that old chariot comes, I'm willing to leave you. I'm bound for the promised land. Friends, I'm willing to leave you. I'll meet you in the morning when you reach the promised land, on the other side of Jordan. For I'm bound for the promised land." The song was one of the secret messages that slaves used to pass information to each other, especially when one of them was about to try to journey to freedom. Harriet did not yet know, but she was learning how to live a secret life. When night fell on the day that she sang on the promised land, Harriet slipped into darkness and headed for freedom, hiding by day, following the North Star by night. After her escape, she went back again and again to guide other slaves to freedom. She risked her life and her liberty at a time when Northerners and Southerners were trying to find a way to live with the stain of slavery. Slaveholders in the South offered rewards of thousands of dollars to catch this little black woman who carried a gun and was ready to use it. Her heroic war gradually became known, and she was hailed in the North as Black Moses, because like Moses in the Bible, she had led people out of slavery. The United States was split between the slave states of the South and the free states of the North. 1861, when the Civil War began, the Union officially divided as Southern state became the Confederate States of America, while the Northern states, including those that came to be known as border states, remained in the Union. The Civil War changed Harriet's mission. Instead of trying to help just a few slaves escape to freedom, she joined the Union's cause, devoting her life to gaining freedom for all slaves. Like Moses in the Bible, Harriet Tubman, as the Black Moses, worked as a spy. The Moses of the Bible secretly gathered information by sending spies into Canaan, the promised land. The Bible says he ordered his spies to go out and see the land and what it is and the people that dwell therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many. Moses was spy master, and so was the Black Moses. Harriet Tubman spied for the Union and talked slaves into doing the same, sometimes even going into Confederate territory to help Union soldiers gather information that could win battles. She and all the other African Americans who spied for the Union knew the price of their courage. If they were caught, they could be hanged. Harriet's war had begun when North and South were at peace, but there was no peace for Harriet. She wanted to save all the men, women, and children who still were slaves. I have heard their groans and sighs and seen their tears, she said, and I will give every drop of blood in my veins to freedom. When the Civil War began, her personal war against slavery became part of the war to preserve the Union. Her spycraft, her cunning mind, her secret ways, no, they would be working for the Union Army. She believed that what she was doing would end slavery for all time. She was not alone. She was one of countless and usually unknown African Americans who served the Union as spies. This book is about Harriet, but it is also about some of those other spies who served in what Frederick Douglass himself, a runaway slave, called the true history of the Civil War. And that history he wrote is the work of faithful, active, and daring African Americans who repeatedly threaded their way through the lines of the rebels, exposing themselves to bullets, conveying important information to the Union Army. Harriet's Escape, Chapter 1. Back in the days before the United States existed, 3 British colonies, Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, could not agree on their boundaries. So British could not agree on their boundaries. British officials sent Charles Mason, an astronomer, and Jeremiah Dixon, a surveyor, to the colonies to solve the problem. From 1763 to 1767, Mason and Dixon surveyed and corrected the boundaries of these 3 colonies, setting the new boundaries with stone markers. Many stones are still in place. The line they drew went east-west between Pennsylvania and Maryland, and north-south along the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, which separates Chesapeake and Delaware Bays. It became known as the Mason-Dixon Line. By the early 19th century, it was the symbolic boundary between slavery and freedom. To the north was Pennsylvania, which has passed a law abolishing slavery. To the south was Maryland, whose eastern region, the Eastern Shore, ran along the edge of another slave state, Delaware. Although officially Maryland was a slave state, the state was split, with some people opposing slavery. On a farm near Booktown, on Maryland Eastern Shore, Harriet Tubman was born, probably in 1822. Her parents were slaves named Harry Green and Benjamin Rose. They named their 5th child Araminta Rose. Her nickname was Minty. Minty Rose was still a child, too young for the fields, when she first felt the pain of a whip wielded by a woman engaged, because Minty did not dust well enough. When Minty was about 12 years old, her master threw a heavy iron weight on a slave suspected of trying to run away. The weight missed the slave and struck Minty. The blow fractured her skull and knocked her out. When she came to, she was still in a daze. But she went back to work with the blood and sweat rolling down my face still. I couldn't see. For the rest of her life, Minty suffered from what the blow did to her brain. She would suddenly fall asleep, sometimes in the middle of a sentence. While working, she would unexpectedly feel extremely tired and struggle to keep on working. Nowadays, doctors will probably say she had epilepsy, but Minty never saw a doctor. She began having visions that seemed to give her a glimpse for the future. In some way, the blow to her head helped to shape her because the visions made her believe in herself. She was a young, cruelly treated slave, but something deep inside her was stealing her when she was do great deeds. She grew up to be strong and smart. I could tie a plow barrel on one shoulder, she boasted. Her owner, often hired her out to other masters on nearby corn and tobacco farms in the oak and pine forest that added timber crops to the slave owners' vast estates. At about the age of 22, she married a free African American named John Tubman, perhaps hoping that someday he could buy her freedom. The marriage did not free her. She was still a slave, still a person who could be bought and sent somewhere else. Far from her family, Minty dropped her nickname to her mother's name and became known as Harriet Tubman. For about 5 years, she worked sometimes in fields, sometimes in forests, where she hauled logs or chopped wood. She could chop half a cord a day. The death of her master in 1849 worried Harriet, for she feared that his widow would try to raise money by selling slaves to the higher bidder. Years before, 2 of Harriet's sisters had been sold and forced to leave their children behind. Slave traders often bought slaves to work in the cotton plantations of Georgia and Mississippi, a fate dreaded by Maryland slaves. Harriet took her fears to her husband and said they should flee to the north. John Tubman refused, but Harriet began plans to escape and talk her brother Henry and Ben into joining her. On September 17, 1849, the 3 ran away. Their owner bought a newspaper advertisement offering a $300 reward for their return. The advertisement says, Minty was about 27 years, is a chestnut color, fine looking and about 5 feet high. The advertisement also appeared in the Gazette in Wilmington, Delaware. This shows that the slave owner believed the most likely escape route was across Delaware, then through Wilmington through a free state, as states that forbade slavery were called. He was right. Somewhere on the flight to freedom, the 2 brothers lost their nerve. They headed back to slavery and forced their sister to return with them and take their punishment. A few days later, Harriet ran away alone. This time, she did not turn back. There was one of 2 things I had a right to, liberty or death, Harriet later said. If I could not have one, I would have the other. For no man should take me alive. I should fight for my liberty as long as my strength lasted. Harriet traveled by night, stopping before dawn at a safe house, where an anti-slavery family brought Maryland low by helping her. Many of these people were Quakers, members of the Religious Society of Friends. Quakers were against slavery, and they knew how to help slaves escape on secret routes to the north. We fed, we clothed, and directed them onwards towards the North Star, wrote a Maryland Quaker. We often combined them to other friends, but they often traveled alone through swamps and byways. Public roads were avoided. We sometimes hired trusted colored men to go with them. Harriet kept following the North Star, moving from one safe house to the next until she reached Wilmington. There, Thomas Garrett, a Quaker who ran a night in a blacksmithing business, secretly helped slaves head north, just as his parents had done when he was a child. Garrett and other men and women helped more than 2,700 slaves pass through Delaware to freedom in Pennsylvania. In 1848, the year before Harriet fled, Garrett had been trying to convict him in Newcastle, Delaware, of aiding in the escape of a family of Maryland slaves. The United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney showed how important he thought the case to be by sitting as the judge in the trial. He fined Garrett $5,400, then an enormous sum that left Garrett almost penniless. After hearing the sentence, Garrett used the Quaker way of speaking to say to the judge, "You has left me without $1. I said to you and to all in this courtroom that if anyone knows a fugitive who wants shelter, send him to Thomas Garrett, and he will befriend him." Whether Harriet met Garrett on her flight northward is not known, but she and he later worked together on the Underground Railroad, the secret delivery system that got her across the state line to Pennsylvania. At the moment she crossed that line between slavery and freedom, she later said, "I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. Now I was free. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven." Chapter 2. The Underground Railroad. Since slavery, earliest day in America, people hated slavery and helped slaves escape in the North. In the early days, the helpers had no name for their secret escape routes. But because the fleeing slaves did their best not to be seen, it was said they were traveling underground. When railroad lines started appearing in America in the 1820s, the term Underground Railroad began to catch on. Escape routes were called lanes. Houses were escaping slaves. Got shelter were stations, and the people who held the freight get from one station to the next were conductors. Men and women like the Garretts who watched over the Underground Railroad in an area were called station masters. People who supported slavery considered the Underground Railroad a criminal organization whose members were slave stealers. Because slaves were considered property, anyone helping a slave escape in the Southern state could be arrested for theft and severely punished. Jonathan Walker, a ship captain, was tried in Florida in 1944 for trying to take 7 runaway slaves to the British West Indies, where slavery was outlawed. Walker was found guilty and sentenced to be fined, jailed, and branded. He was the first man in American history to be branded by order of a federal judge. A blacksmith made a special branding iron which was hidden in the courtroom. Walker's right hand was raised above his head and tied to a pillar so spectators could get a good view. Then a United States Marshal pressed the iron against Walker's palm and branded SS for slave stealer on it. The horrible event inspired John Greenleaf Whittier to write a poem, The Branded Hand. In the poem, Whittier predicted that the branded palm should profess salvation for the slaves. Whittier was an abolitionist, a person who wanted to abolish slavery. During the same time, the United States Congress was trying to deal with slavery. Southern states were threatening to leave the Union if the Northern states outlawed slavery. Abolitionists believed that if slavery continued, the United States would be torn apart away. They were right. Month by month, year by year, America was moving toward civil war. In 1850, the year after Harriet escaped slavery, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, a federal law that made it criminal of anyone who helped escaping slaves or refused to help government agents chasing slaves. The new law did not stop the Underground Railroad or Harriet Tubman. On Harriet's first trip as an Underground Railroad conductor, she returned to Maryland and managed to escape with her niece and the niece's 2 children. Then in September 1851, she slipped back to her birthplace, hoping to guide her husband to the north. But John Tubman had remarried and wanted to stay. Harriet left him behind for good, but kept on with her mission as conductor, leading many others to freedom. She made it clear to the slaves she helped that she was in charge and had to be strictly obeyed. She had a gun and warned that anyone who decided to return would be shot as a traitor. The writer went and asked Harriet if she really would have shot anyone who wanted to turn back. Yes, she said. If he was weak enough to give out, he would be weak enough to betray us all, and all who helped us. And do you think I will let so many die just for one coward man? Harriet became a celebrity among abolitionists in the North and one a criminal in the South. From 1851 to the beginning of the Civil War, Harriet made about a dozen trips to Maryland and guided about 70 people to freedom. She taught many more slaves how to escape. I never lost a passenger, she said. In her life as a smuggler of slaves, Harriet learned some of the basic spy procedures that today intelligence agents call tradecraft. For example, if two spies must meet, they try to set up a meeting in a way that puts only one in danger. Harriet did this by having escaping slaves meet her 7 or 8 miles from their cabins. Chances were that anyone spotting their escape would capture them before they reached her. She also used the cut out when a cautious spy wants to give a message or document to a contact or a partner. Her or she does not set up a meeting. Instead, arrangements are made for a third person, a cutout, to make the pickup from one spy and the delivery to the other. In this way, if a spy is being followed, he or she does not lead the follower to the second spy. Harriet worked on the Underground Railroad, made her enemy of slave catchers and their allies. The dozen of slave traders who prospered by buying Maryland slaves and shipping them south. For years, slave catchers looked for her in hopes of collecting rewards, one as high as $12,000 for her capture. They used specially trained dogs to turn runaway slaves, but neither the catchers nor the dogs ever found anyone who was in her care. The slave catchers' repeated failures added to her legend. Boston abolitionists especially honor her, often asking her to tell her Underground Railroad stories in her fundraising meetings. She sometimes spoke under a false name and was well protected by her friends in the North. Abolitionists found produced anti-slavery newspapers and pamphlets that poured in the North and the South. Even Northerners were shocked by the hatred and violence that peppered abolitionist writings. One leading abolitionist, for instance, said that every slaveholder has forbidden his right to leave. Concerned about such threats, the state legislators in Connecticut, Maine, and New Hampshire introduced bills to restrain abolitionist publications. Abolitionists continued to publish their views and to disobey the Fugitive Slave Act. They also extended the Underground Railroad into Canada beyond the reach of federal law. Harriet now began leading slaves, including her brothers, all the way to Canada. For about 6 years, she lived part of the time in St. Catharines, Canada, a refuge for escapes, and part of the time in western New York State, site of many stations on the Underground Railroad lines into Canada. One of those stations is Rochester. It was run by abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass. He and Harriet had been born slaves in the same Maryland county. He had run away in 1838. His station in Rochester was often stopped for the slaves Harriet sent to Canada. One of the best Underground Railroad workers in Canada was Alexander Milton Rose of Belleville, Ontario. Doctor and naturalist, Ross began his own crusade to help escaped slaves after reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, an anti-slavery novel written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. He visited many of the ex-slaves living in Canada, heard heart-rending stories, and saw the indelible marks of the lash and branding iron upon their bodies. Before heading south on his personal crusade, Ross met with several abolitionists in Boston and in Philadelphia. Warning him of the dangers he faced, one of them gave him a pistol. Ross managed to meet with slaves in the Deep South by giving himself what modern spies would call a collar. He introduced himself to plantation owners as a bird watcher and got permission to roam around the property. Because Southerners look at Canada as pro-South, Ross was usually treated as a welcome stranger. While supposedly looking for birds, Ross talked to slaves and told them about escape routes to Canada. Ross was called an abductor rather than a conductor because he did not lead slaves to freedom but urged them to escape. He spent months in areas, secretly and dangerously, developing friendship with slaves on plantations in Virginia and Tennessee and South Carolina and Louisiana, Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama. When Ross had arranged an escape, he sent word to conductors in Ohio and Pennsylvania that he was shipping hardware, which meant male slaves, or dry goods, which meant female slaves. Ross met Harriet Tubman in Canada, and like her, he would become a secret agent for the Union during a war that in 1858 was rapidly approaching. Chapter 3, Slave Revolt. For Harriet Tubman, Alexander Milton Rhodes, and other abolitionists in Canada and the United States by 1850, the war against slavery was changed from a war of pamphlets and speeches to a war of guns and blood. Both Southerners and Northerners were talking about taking a path to violence, and nothing was feared more in the South than the slave uprising. The bloodiest revolt had begun in Haiti on the Caribbean island of Hispaniola in 1791. Nearly 500,000 slaves were against the French in a struggle that ended with Haiti's Declaration of Independence in 1804. Word of the massacres spread throughout the American South, especially in the rice-growing areas of South Carolina, where slaves outnumbered whites 80 or 90 to 1. South Carolina had more slaves than any other state. In May 1822, a slave in South Carolina told his master incredible news. A revolt of thousands of slaves around Charleston was to erupt in July, led by Denmark Vesey. He was a free man and leader of a black Methodist church. Authorities rounded up suspects and tried them in a special court in Charleston. Vesey and 34 others were hanged. With federal troops guarding the gallows, little publicity was given to the trial because Charleston officials did not want to spread the news that slaves were capable of planning revolts. Then, in 1831, came a revolt that did happen. Nat Turner, a slave in southern Virginia, recruited several fellow slaves to join him in a rebellion. After killing Turner's master and the rest of his family, the band murdered nearly 60 white people, mostly women and children. For weeks, federal troops, Virginia militia, and civilians bent on vengeance, hunting down Turner, killing scores of other slaves, most of them innocent. Turner and 20 others were tried and hanged. Angry, fearful Southerners accused Northern abolitionists of stirring up the slaves, inspiring the revolt. By what Southerners saw as more than a coincidence, William Lloyd Garrison, a leading Massachusetts abolitionist, had started publishing his newspaper, The Liberator. 7 months before Turner started his revolt, most slave owners did not think that slaves were capable of organizing their own rebellion, so they blamed Garrison. Abolitionists were getting more and more violent in their campaign against slavery, and the federal government enforced the formation of the Fugitive Slave Act. Congress has been trying to avoid war by balancing slave states against free states, meaning that for every territory entering the Union as a free state, another territory enters as a state that allows slavery. But then Congress passed a decision to the people, allowing each new state to vote for or against slavery. When the Kansas Territory opened up in 1854, abolitionists raised funds for hundreds of families to move from free states to Kansas. There, they could vote against slavery in their new state. Back in the ballots were boxes of rifles sent to Kansas by Massachusetts abolitionists. The weapons were called Beecher's Bible, named after Henry Ward Beecher, a New York clergyman who said that slaveholders might understand a rifle better than a Bible. Henry was Harris Beecher's stout brother. After hearing about the abolitionists' plan to take the Kansas vote to make it a free state, a leading Missouri politician told his pro-slavery supporters, "I advise you one and all to vote at the point of the bow, knife, and revolver." Thousands of armed Missourians rode across the border to illegally cast votes for slavery. They won, but the election had so many fake voters that another election was held. Again, the border ruffians from Missouri rode and voted for slavery, winning the elections even though they did not live in Kansas. The new pro-slave legislature passed a law forbidding anyone to write or speak out against slavery. Under another law, anyone who helped slaves to escape could be hanged. The Kansas slavery was rolled on. In May 1856, more than 500 armed pro-slavers attacked Lawrence, a new Kansas town founded by abolitionists. They burned down a hotel, smashed the presses of abolitionist newspapers, wrecked homes and stores, and killed a man. Joe Brown was one of those abolitionists who saw Kansas as a battleground where bullets, no ballots, will decide the issue of slavery. He and 5 of his sons come to the territory from Ohio in 1855 to keep it from becoming a slave state. Brown reacted to Lawrence's attack by leading 7 men, including 4 of his sons and son-in-law, to the town of Pottawatomie. There they drove pro-slavery and his 2 sons from their homes and hanged them to death. That night they killed 2 more pro-slavers. U.S. Army peacekeepers and pro-slavers pursued Brown, but he escaped thanks to the help of supporters. The events in Kansas convinced him that the only way to end slavery was to lead an armed slave revolt against pro-slavers. Harry Truman will be among the recruits.